The tragic story of Henry Lee Lucas. You're about to hear the tragic story of Henry Lee Lucas, the man who was allegedly responsible for the death of his mom, 15-year-old girlfriend, and the demise of almost 300 people, only for everyone to find out that it might have all been a lie. It's a tale of tragic upbringing, unfathomable lying, an alleged mass murderer, and a lot of shadiness present in law enforcement. This is the story of the Confession Killer. Henry was born in 1936 in Blacksburg, Virginia, to an alcoholic father and a prostitute mother. He was the last out of 7 children, and details of his upbringing are quite dour. At age 8, he was beaten with a wooden plank by his mom, which sent him into a coma that lasted for 3 days. At age 10, Lucas got into a fight with his brother, and in that altercation, he lost one of his eyes. They say his mom forced him to watch her while she engaged in coital relations with her clients. She also forced him to cross-dress out in the open. This was in hopes to groom him in her way of life, so he would later become a prostitute for both men and women. She wanted him to join the family business. His father, on the other hand, made and sold alcohol illegally. He died of hyperthermia after he got heavily intoxicated during a blizzard. Lucas later dropped out of high school in the 6th grade and ran away from home. From this point, he started carrying out a bunch of burglaries. It was also at this point that some say he killed his first victim, a 17-year-old girl who went missing in 1951. He wasn't convicted for this crime, even though he confessed to it. This is because he later recanted the confession, which is honestly Lucas's pattern, as you'll find out soon enough. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison for the burglaries, and after he was released, he went to live with his half-sister in Michigan. This is where Lucas's story started to take a turn for the worse. In January 1969, while he was living with his sister, Lucas got a visit from his mother. They got into a heated argument about him returning to Virginia to take care of her. Things got so heated that Lucas stabbed her with a knife after she hit him on the head with a broom. She died almost instantly. Lucas claimed that it was in self-defense, but he was later sentenced to 40 years in prison. He was released 10 years later due to overcrowding in the prison. But 10 years in prison wasn't enough to stop him from carrying on with his nefarious ways. In 1979, he was convicted for attempted kidnapping involving 3 schoolgirls. He did 3.5 years for this sentence. When he was released, he moved to Pennsylvania, where he got married to a woman by the name of Betty Crawford. His marriage lasted for 2 years until they separated due to him sexually assaulting Betty's young daughters. He moved from state to state at this point, until he eventually befriended a man by the name of Otis O'Toole, and they both worked together from 1979 to 1981 in a roofing company in Jacksonville, Florida. O'Toole had a niece by the name of Becky Powell, who was young at the time. They say that during his time with O'Toole, he committed over 100 murders, and some of them were assisted by O'Toole. Lucas says he fell in love with Becky Powell, and he convinced her to move with him to Texas, where they started working as caregivers to a woman named Kate Rich. Mind you, Becky was 15 at the time. In August of 1982, Lucas killed Becky, and 3 weeks later, he killed Kate Rich. He was later arrested by a Texas Ranger for the illegal possession of a firearm. After spending some time with the police, he confessed to the deaths of both Becky and Kate Rich. He even led them to the place where he buried their bodies, and the Rangers found skeletal fragments, all of which were human, but it's unclear if they were the bones of the alleged victims. His testament to the demise of Becky and Kate led to him making even more confessions, and this was when he really became the Confession Killer. What do you get when you combine a man who's been convicted of multiple crimes and has a taste for strawberry milkshakes with law enforcement? You get a man willing to do anything and say anything if it means he'll get a little treat. In November 1983, Lucas became a global sensation. He started to confess to multiple murders around the country, and he announced that he was responsible for murdering more than 100 people. So a task force was established just for Lucas. This task force was not created to carry out investigations or any thorough police work. The task force was established to carry out interviews with Lucas confessing to various crimes, and in so doing, they cleared about 213 unsolved murder cases from different parts of the country. Lucas confessed to being responsible for them all. Now, the reason why Lucas was so cooperative was because he was receiving preferential treatment from the police. He was allowed to smoke as many cigars as he wanted, and he received a strawberry milkshake every day. And in return, Lucas confessed to so many crimes, and the more murders he confessed to, the more preferential treatment he got. He met with over 1,000 officers from around the country, all of them hoping that Lucas would confess to an unsolved murder that happened in their county. Lucas even took the officers to different crime scenes. There he would tell them things only the murderer knew, and the cases would be closed. Lucas even claimed that it was his acceptance of God that led him to confess to all these crimes. He said that Jesus appeared to him in his cell at one point and told him to confess to all these murders so he could bring solace to all the victimized families. It was a rather harrowing ordeal. He got convicted for 11 homicides, but one in particular stood out. This was the murder of Deborah Jackson. At the time, she was known as the Orange Socks Case, as the woman was wearing a pair of orange socks when her body was discovered. When Lucas confessed to killing Deborah, he faced a death penalty, but something about his confession just didn't make sense. Deborah Jackson was killed in Texas, and during the time of her demise, Henry was in Florida for a job, so there was no way he could have killed her. But Lucas maintained his position in court, claiming he was responsible for her death. This drove his legal team nuts because the evidence suggested otherwise. Lucas later retracted his confession, saying he wasn't responsible for orange socks, and he only confessed to that because he wanted to take his life to the execution because he felt guilty for killing his girlfriend. And it worked. They say he smiled all the way to the police car when he heard he was going to die. But an experienced investigative reporter by the name of Hugh Ainsworth started to investigate the case, and he noticed something odd. Ainsworth had worked with Ted Bundy during his confessions, so he understood the way serial killers worked. He noticed that there was no discernible pattern to the way Henry chose his victims. The frequency of his crimes seems impossible, and a lot of the crimes happened in different states, and some of them were just days apart. So if he'd been responsible for each of these crimes, he would have had to have constantly been on the road. In one case, he would have needed to travel 2 days on the road, driving at a speed of 55 miles per hour, and only then would he have made it in time to commit both murders. Once, when he was being filmed by Japanese filmmakers, he claimed that he had also killed in Japan as well, and when they asked him how he got to Japan, he said he drove there. At this point, newspapers started to dismiss some of Henry's confessions as a hoax, but the Texas Rangers announced that all his claims were legitimate, and this garnered the attention of a district attorney, Vic Feazell. Feazell was an attorney in McLennan County, and when he did his investigations, he found out that Lucas couldn't have been responsible for some of these murders, including the ones in McLennan County. He revealed that the Texas police and all the law enforcement officers that met with Lucas showed him evidence from the cases to help him confess to the murders. It was later revealed that they had let him read case files, and this made his confessions consistent with the information already held by police. Vic Feazell blew the whistle, ratting out the corruption in law enforcement, and this did not go down well with the cops. Apparently, even cops hate snitches. They arrested Feazell on false accusations, and the FBI even hired local lawyers to claim that they had bribed Feazell. They defamed him. A reporter from a television station in Dallas even ran an 8-part documentary on him, claiming Feazell was a crooked lawyer. He was eventually cleared of all charges, and Feazell sued the station and got paid a restitution fee of $58 million. The shadiness of the Texas police further proved that Henry didn't commit a lot of the crimes he had confessed to. He held a press conference and withdrew almost all his confessions. And since he had ended his false confession spree, he was no longer useful to the police. But don't forget, he was already on death row. When Lucas realized he was going to die, he started to plead for his life. He said that he wasn't the mass murderer that he'd been made out to be. He confessed that the only person he ever killed was his mother. He desperately tried to get out of death row, and luckily, his prayers were answered. The governor of Texas at the time was former President George W. Bush, and he decided that the evidence tying Henry to the murders was not enough, and it was only his confessions that gave a connection, and most of them had been proven to be false. So Lucas's sentence was reduced from death row to life in incarceration. Henry Lee Lucas lived the rest of his days in prison and died of congestive heart failure on March 12, 2000, with his body buried at Captain Joe Byrd Cemetery. Henry's story is one of disheartening origins, childhood trauma, pathological lying, confirmation bias, and manipulation on the side of law enforcement. It's unclear which of Henry's stories are true and which are just flat-out lies. But it does shed light on how sometimes even law enforcement can get lazy and fabricate all sorts of fake stories and can go to great extents to cover their tracks, including taking advantage of people willing to do anything for a little preferential treatment. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, make sure to subscribe for more.